something like 3 or 4% of the world's ecosystem are marshes, right? But it sequesters something like 30% of the world's carbon. The net carbon sequestration of an acre of coastal Louisiana marshes is 80x 1 acre of terrestrial forest. Coastal ecosystems, particularly marshes, have an outsized impact on drawing down carbon. There are tremendous risks that our communities are facing. The climate crisis is today, it's yesterday, and it's tomorrow. The idea that Louisiana stands alone is a risky place to start a civilization, but so is everywhere else. Let's run for the hills, right? But I was just in the hills a couple weeks ago, and there's a heat wave in the hills too. It looks a little bit different in different places, but everybody has risk. And what Louisiana has done with this risk, we're not just going to focus on the particular challenge at hand. We're going to try and fix the process. We're going to try and start as far back as we can, put science at the forefront of decision making. We're going to try and bring the stakeholders in the communities into the conversation so that when we are talking about coastal planning, we're not just talking about birds and fish, but we're talking about communities and languages and way of lives and indigenous ideals and indigenous knowledge. The Gulf Coast and the researchers and the thinkers in this area have been leading on this for many, many, many decades. It's not can we create a blue economy? It's not can we create this opportunity? It's here. It's happening now. Researchers at LSU and Tulane and UNO and Nichols are doing some of the most innovative work across the world. Why is Louisiana poised to do it? Because we have the workforce and we have the minds that have been out in the Gulf building platforms, servicing platforms for decades and decades and decades. 2023 master plan just came out. It is a 50-year, $50 billion plan. It is Louisiana's moonshot. This is a coastal and blue and resilient economy, Silicon Valley.
Welcome to the Blue Economy Primer, a New Orleans-based podcast where you learn from the experts the practical tools and solution sets that will empower your community to adapt and thrive in a new blue era of rising seas and economic discontinuity.
On today's episode, we are speaking with a visionary leader on the front lines of developing the complex mix of policy and engineering solutions that is required to realize long-term community resilience along the Louisiana Gulf Coast. As a team leader and environmental law expert, he has become a key facilitator reconciling complex state and federal regulatory frameworks with the critical need for cutting-edge marine infrastructure planning and engineering solutions that are integral to preparing our working coast for the ongoing and inevitable impacts of coastal land loss and associated marine habitat disruption. Beaux, thank you so much for joining us on the Blue Economy Primer. Would you like to introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Yeah, absolutely, Greg. Thanks for having me on. So I am currently the acting president and CEO of the Water Institute of the Gulf. I am born and raised in Ruston, Louisiana, north of here, but have called New Orleans home for about a decade and Baton Rouge home for about 7 or 8 years before that. So as you said, I come to this conversation from an environmental coastal law background. I used to head up the environmental section at the Attorney General's office in Baton Rouge for the last 2 Attorney Generals, where we handled everything from oil spills to wildlife and fisheries cases to coastal land loss issues. And now I have the privilege of being at the Water Institute and working on some exciting work there.
Can you tell us about the Water Institute's mission, agenda, and theory of change, particularly for our listeners from other parts of the world?
Yeah, absolutely, Greg. So the Water Institute is an independent, nonprofit, applied research institution that's focused on advancing science and developing integrated methods to solve complex environmental challenges and societal challenges. So what does that mean, right? So the Water Institute, what we think is that we try and help communities thoughtfully prepare for an uncertain future, right? And that, whether that's Louisiana, whether that's the city of New Orleans, or whether it's other stakeholders like the federal government or like a company or a nonprofit, what we try and do is bring science and put it at the forefront of decision making to help decision makers balance the many stakeholders, the many challenges that they have. We're a group of about 85 people, scientists, engineers, urban planners, lawyers, grants and contracts specialists, other administrative professionals. We are centered mostly in Baton Rouge and New Orleans. We have an office that sticks out over the levee in Baton Rouge, and then we have an office at the beach at UNO. And then we have folks remotely scattered around 17 or 18 different states. And the work that we focus on is primarily focused in and around Louisiana, but we also do a lot of work along the Gulf Coast, really from the Southern Atlantic across to Texas. So Virginia, South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, and along down to Texas. So that's what we focus on. From our standpoint, that's who we are. That's what we do. Really, our vision, it's threefold. It's resilient and equitable communities. It's sustainable environments and thriving economies. And I think that that vision statement, which is indicative of a good vision statement, is not just our own, right? It's shared by our partners. It's likely shared by Deep Blue. It's shared by folks like the Greater New Orleans Incorporated, right? These are things that we are all collectively working on. What we do, right, is science and engineering. How we do it is using these interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary methods of bringing people across silos to try and navigate tough questions. But why we do it, it's that vision. It's resilient and equitable communities. It's thriving economies and it's healthy ecosystems.
You are a Louisiana native, clearly committed to our long-term well-being. Can you tell us a bit about your background and what led you to your current work?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I grew up in a small town in North Louisiana, Ruston, which was very far away from the coast. At least it felt like it. But grew up with a healthy understanding of, conservation and the outdoors. There's not a whole lot to do up there other than hunting and fishing and farming, which was a lot of fun, right? We spent a lot of time outside. And so I spent a lot of time in the Gulf Coast, coming down here to go fishing for redfish and duck hunting and kind of engage with coastal Louisiana the way that many people do through Sportsman's Paradise. It actually wasn't like many of us, right? Many of us who have taken that journey elsewhere. It wasn't until I was doing a tour out of Louisiana for undergrad when Hurricane Katrina and all of the things that followed it really kind of shook me back to Louisiana. I was planning to come back anyway, probably, but seeing what was going on here, focusing on environmental issues and recognizing that there was no better place in the country to not just respond and try and be a force of good, but to actually find opportunity to be international leaders. Louisiana was doing it, and Louisiana is still doing it. And so there was no place to be other than to come home. And so I moved back for law school and went to LSU and trained, to be an environmental lawyer. That was my focus. And lo and behold, the oil spill happens. And out of a terrible tragedy, as an environmental lawyer, where else would you go than right there? So I jumped in to the oil spill team at the Attorney General's office and worked on the closeout of the oil spill cases and a lot of the ancillary cases that were around it, and just re-solidified my love for this place and the culture and home. I mean, this place is home. My family's here. I have 2 little kids that are learning the language that my grandparents didn't pass down to us, and it's a beautiful place to be.
The Water Institute has a broad and complex agenda working at the intersection of different public and private sector organizations, which is pretty unique. Can you tell us about the Institute's relation to Deltares in the Netherlands and how the Water Institute has become such a critical regional player in such a short time?
Greg, the Dutch connection and Deltares is really integral to the founding of the Water Institute of the Gulf and is still present today. And so to kind of answer that, I'll take a step back. Back in 2005, 2006, in the aftermath of Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, the leaders in the state of Louisiana, particularly Senators Mary Landrieu, and at the time the Coastal Director Garrett Graves, who's now a congressman, as well as the Baton Rouge Area Foundation and folks from the New Orleans philanthropic and business community, started to collaborate and communicate with folks in the Dutch embassy and started taking some trips back and forth to the Netherlands. They took several trips back and forth. And one of the things that they kept seeing is that not only had the Dutch become experts in engineering and water management, and we're now selling that across the world, But what they notice is the way that that the community there was operating somewhat as an ecosystem, right? So you had the government working together with the universities, working together with the private sector. And in the middle, they recognized there's this group called Deltaris, who you mentioned, who was a nonprofit science and engineering research institute that was not part of the government, but it worked closely with the government. That was not part of the universities, but worked closely with the universities. Was not part of the private sector, but worked very closely with them. And the leaders in Baton Rouge and New Orleans said, you know what? We need that here. And that's where the idea for the Water Institute was born. Fast forward a few years to the BP oil spill, the funding became available to realize this vision. And from a grant through the Baton Rouge Area Foundation and the state of Louisiana through the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, the Water Institute was founded. And it was founded, to play a similar role to Deltaris in Louisiana. It's not to say, and it's still not the case today, that there are not visionary scientists and visionary leaders throughout the Louisiana and Gulf Coast kind of economy and thought leaders around. There's fantastic folks here, but the idea was to create this one entity that could try and help be some connective tissue and pull things together. And so that's it's set up in our DNA to have this connection to the international experts and the international leaders. How that's carried forward to today is we still work very closely with the Netherlands. We were there just under a year ago. We'll probably go back soon, bring thought leaders and folks working in and out of government to go visit and learn from the Dutch. But we really try and carry some of those innovative ideals forward here in Louisiana. One of the interesting things, Greg, that I'll add in is that I learned recently that there's a interesting backstory to, post-Katrina. Everybody was talking about we got to do like the Dutch. We have to do like the Dutch. And the Dutch have done a fantastic job. But one of the really interesting things that I learned recently is that in 1953, when, half of the Netherlands flooded, they had their Katrina moment, right? And that's what really solidified their opportunities and solidified their shared vision to never let that happen again. You know who they called? The Waterways Experimentation Station in Vicksburg, Mississippi, which has now become the Army Corps' Erdek Research Facility, which is a partner of ours and a partner of many folks in the Gulf Coast and across the country. And so it's really interesting to see this come full circle. And I think that was lost in the early years of, kind of post-Katrina and obviously the back and forth between the community and the Corps. But one of the things that is interesting for us to acknowledge is this is not a new, yes, this is tip of the spear in certain areas, but the Gulf Coast and the researchers and the thinkers in this area have been leading on this for many, many, many decades. So it's not to say there's not new and exciting things happening, but when we look to the international leaders, we looked at Deltaris, we looked at the Dutch, we've been doing this here for a long time, and our shared risk and our collaboration and communication can only make all of us better.
Yeah, that's a great story, and I think another example of how we don't always acknowledge or celebrate the leadership and innovation that is coming out of the Gulf South in these sectors or on these topics. You remind us that the BP oil spill was such an important benchmark, tragically in terms of the environmental damage and socio-cultural dislocation that it triggered, but also in terms of the important institutional evolution and leadership development that it likely accelerated for organizations like the Water Institute and CPRA.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you look back through the history of environmental law and environmental policy, at the front end of big change, you'll always see some big charismatic event. It's either the threat of a loss of some charismatic megafauna or megaflora, right? You have DDT and the eagles and the pelicans. You've got Love Canal. You've got the Cuyahoga River catching on fire, right? You've got acid rain. You've got these big events that really shake people to their core. And then you have systemic change. The thing that was fantastic about the response to the BP oil spill and a terrible tragedy is that this clearly wasn't the first time this had been done. And so you have the Exxon Valdez, which happened, several decades before, and after the continuous and slog of litigation and back and forth over the Exxon Valdez oil spill, you had the creation of the Oil Pollution Act of 1990. which completely changed the paradigm of how we did this, of how we managed large-scale oil spills. And not everything was perfect by a long shot, right? Not everything was perfect, but the tools that the federal government and the states, the 5 Gulf states and the stakeholders in and around the Gulf Coast had to navigate this situation by, having a, responsible party designated up front at the beginning to, enter into this multi-district litigation to try and bring everything under one hood was a way different experience than, navigating the Exxon Valdez. And so you have the Restore Act, and the Restore Council come into play to start trying to, help navigate the settlement funds. You had the 5 Gulf states, on the most part, working together, obviously, with very, very different interests and very different impacts. And I'm sure there's a lot of things that could have been done better. There always are, right? Both on the response side, on, the litigation side, but there was a lot of lessons that have been learned before, and I think that it's a situation where there was a terrible tragedy, not only the loss of 11 lives, primarily that, and then massive ecosystem and economic damage to the Gulf Coast. But from that moment, you had, it was one of the many wake up calls that we on the Gulf Coast have had. And rather than these revenues that came out of the spill going, just flitting about into the air, the state of Louisiana was able to do something with these revenues because it had planned ahead. And that's one of the most critical pieces to understand here is that the state of Louisiana for decades had been recognizing its coastal risks, starting back with the Coast 2050 plan, Here Today, Gone Tomorrow, the CRCL report, and moving into the 2007 Coastal Master Plan, right? And this master plan was very similar to what we have in New Orleans with the Urban Water Plan. It was a vision document that recognized that we have these shared problems, that there are ways to push back against them. It wasn't, nuts and bolts, what we're going to do, what project we're going to prioritize, but we had this plan, we had this vision. And because we had this plan, and because we had, just after that plan, consolidated government in Louisiana, where we pulled from, I think, 10 or 12 different state agencies and created the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority and created the Governor's Office of Coastal Activities and created these structural changes. When that money came in, right, from this tragedy, the state of Louisiana, unlike the other 4 Gulf states, if I can say so, was able to put that money directly to the highest priority areas, and not just on a whim, and not just what was a particular political priority at that time, but things that had been vetted by science and research and data and the communities. And we were able to take that, we collectively, the state of Louisiana and the community, was able to take those oil spill revenues and put them into what we knew mattered. Now, again, it's not perfect, but Louisiana, because of its pre-planning, was, in my opinion, well set up to handle that challenge.
And if I understand correctly, there's some urgency because those monies are actually sunsetting in the coming years. Is that right?
Yeah. So, if you look at the state of Louisiana's coastal program, the Coastal Master Plan being the kind of the fountainhead of all of this, which is updated every 6 years. The 2023 Master Plan just came out. Encourage everybody to go take a look at it. It's a fantastic document. We had the privilege of assisting the state of Louisiana on many facets, from modeling to the planning processes on that master plan. And it is a 50-year, $50 billion plan, right? So it is a moonshot, right? It is Louisiana's moonshot. And the majority of the funding that has been secured for that plan has come from, the oil spill revenues through the Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act, or the BP oil spill. And yeah, those funds are set up to sunset in 2031, 2032. So we are all actively staring at, somewhat of a coastal fiscal cliff. That being said, right, there are not only additional sources of revenue, but as we look at a $50 billion 50-year plan, we know that there's somewhat of a time value of action, right? Doing things now, putting money in the ground now on the front end. We don't have every dollar identified. The state of Louisiana doesn't have every dollar identified for the next 50 years. But man, am I glad that we stuck that money into the ground as quickly as possible.
And as always, I want to remind our listeners that on the episode webpage, we have links for all of the documents, programs, and organizations that Beaux is referencing so that you can do a deep dive into this information. What does the blue economy and blue technology development mean to you, and how does the Institute reconcile its private and public sector roles and responsibilities?
Yeah, so the blue economy, I think when I hear that phrase or when I see it, I am, kind of move towards, this is something new. This is kind of the next tech sector. This is the new frontier. But then I'm, kind of reminded about what that really looks like here, right? What that really looks like in Louisiana. For instance, let's talk about, wind energy, right? And the amazing advances that are being made in wind energy around the country. I think the first lease sale is going out in the next couple of days off Southwest Louisiana. Well, yeah, this is a new economy. This is a new opportunity. It's a new frontier. But why is Louisiana poised to do it? Because we have the workforce and we have the minds that have been out in the Gulf building platforms, servicing platforms for decades and decades and decades. So, yes, this is a new effort. This is a new endeavor. But Louisiana has been navigating life on a delta of constant change and dynamism since its founding. So this is new and it's old. And when I think about why the Water Institute was set up and the opportunities that exist in Louisiana, yes, my mind goes to the Dutch, right? But it also goes to this, the idea of a canary in a coal mine, right? And this is an analogy that's thrown around all over the place. But, what Louisiana has been navigating since, the 1930s of coastal land loss and what we are navigating now and will be navigating with sea level rise, they are existential threats. They are risk that can threaten our way of life. We know all too well they can threaten our actual life. And the opportunity that exists is to find economic and to find social and equitable opportunities in the face of this risk. And it's not just to make us better, right? It's not just to make Louisiana more resilient, to make Louisiana thrive, but it's because then we're doing this first, right? We are on the front end of the spear. Everybody around the world talks about sea level rise. In Louisiana, we talk about relative sea level rise because we're going down and the water's coming up. So it's faster, right? So the opportunity here is not just, planning for our own sake or not just doing science to protect ourselves, but it's doing science and planning and thought leadership and artistic leadership in this space so that we can go and then be, on the forefront of other communities that are navigating these, right? Our climate and coastal challenges have been well documented, right? We have hurricanes galore, right? We have, blue sky flooding. We have heat waves. We have all of these things. But just open the newspaper or, listening to the radio. We're not alone. Ours happen to be, in a way, and unfortunately, more charismatic historically in that, we have people getting pulled off houses and people dying, and these, the press loves to, find a good story there. But look in Vermont, look in New Hampshire, look at the United States Military Academy right now, or 2 weeks ago, look at the forest fires across Canada, right? I mean, the idea that Louisiana stands alone as a risky place to start a civilization, right? It is a precarious place to build a civilization, but so is everywhere else, right? Climate change and the existential risks that we are facing across the globe have shown us is that it looks a little bit different in different places, but everybody has risk. And what Louisiana has done with this risk, and we haven't done it perfectly, right? Of course, we haven't done it perfectly, but what we have done is said, we're not just going to focus on the particular, challenge at hand. We're going to try and fix the process. We're going to try and start as far back as we can, put science at the forefront of decision making. We're going to try and bring the stakeholders in the communities into the conversation so that when we are talking about coastal planning, we're not just talking about birds and fish but we're talking about communities and languages and way of lives and indigenous thought, indigenous ideals and indigenous knowledge. These are part of the conversation. And yes, that will make us better. It'll make us more resilient. It'll make us thrive. But it's also going to give lessons for the rest of the country and the rest of the world. Now, and the Water Institute is one of the many examples of where that is the case. We were set up with kind of a tripartite mission. The first was to focus the best science and engineering and thought on the state of Louisiana to help us solve our problems, right? If you look at what we did the first 7 years, it was almost primarily for the state of Louisiana, right? Coastal Master Plan, work with and for the state of Louisiana. We've broadened significantly, and it's not by chance. That is explicitly what we were set up to do, which is to say now, take this work that you've done in Louisiana and the lessons that you've learned and go export it elsewhere, right? So we've done the resilient strategy for the city of Houston, the resilient Houston strategy. We're now actively working in the city of Jacksonville. We've been in Charleston. We've helped the state of Virginia set up its coastal master plan. We, worked in the Philippines and Argentina, collaborating with folks in Singapore, right? So we are now, and that's not exporting, Water Institute, work. This is exporting the collective understanding that we have gathered in Louisiana, and we are bringing Louisiana partners with us. But then the third part of our mission and our founding principles was, okay, now once we've gone there, once we've gone to Charleston and Jacksonville and Mobile and, Houston, what are the lessons that we can learn there? What are the methodologies that we've come up there, and how can we bring those back? And that happens on a daily basis, not only in our work with the CPRA, but in the work with the city of New Orleans, our work around communities in Louisiana, where we are taking the tools and methods that we are, starting in Louisiana, honing across the world, and then bringing back at bear for communities here in Louisiana.
Wow. Well, it's great to hear about this kind of bold leadership that the Institute is putting out in the world and the clearly well-deserved successes that are coming with that. So we were excited to hear the breaking news that you were just selected to be part of the prestigious Committee of 100 for Economic Development in Louisiana. Congratulations on that. Can you tell us about what that means for you and how you see the committee's regional role supporting the work you and the Water Institute have been doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first off, thank you. I think it's pretty clear the placement on the Committee of 100, the C100 group is an organizational position. It is not Beaux Jones and Beaux Jones's resume or what he brings to the table. I hope I can bring some good ideas and good conversations. But this is about the Water Institute's role in economic development in Louisiana, and C100 has it's a laundry list of amazing visionary leaders across the state of Louisiana that are trying to pull their communities, their individual communities forward. And why is the Water Institute? Why is what many people may think of as a high-minded scientific organization sitting up on the levee in Baton Rouge? Why are we involved in economic development? Well, number one, we recognize in our vision, right, that it's not just resilient and equitable communities. That is a core piece of what we hope for, but it's also thriving economies. Why? Because who does an economy benefit? It benefits the people. It benefits the ecosystems. It benefits, the opportunities that exist. It makes for more resilient and equitable communities. It allows us to have, healthy ecosystems when we have an economic future, right? So one of the things that we as the Water Institute hope to do is to try and bring some of those ideals from the Dutch government. And I can say unequivocally, this has not always been a perfect execution, right? There are challenges, but our goal is not just that the Water Institute goes and does all this work, or the Water Institute is the one that you see on the front page of the paper, but that the Water Institute is one of the many people in this web, in this ecosystem of thought leadership, of science and engineering. When I what I hope for people when they look into the Gulf Coast or look into Louisiana and say, man, they are leading the charge. They are really putting science first. They are asking the hard questions. They are bringing the community together to have some of the hard discussions, and they are leading from the front. I don't want people to just talk about the Water Institute. I want people to talk about the innovative work that political subdivisions are doing, the levee districts around the state are doing. I want the people to talk about the innovative work that the Army Corps of Engineers is doing. The Army Corps of Engineers is about to embark on a 5-year, $25 million study to think about the comprehensive management of the lower Mississippi River from Cape Girardeau down to Plaquemines Parish, right? to rethink the way that we manage and understand rivers. The state of Louisiana has just put out one of the most comprehensive science-based ecosystem restoration plans in the world. The city of New Orleans is handling challenges and leaning into challenges around urban water and urban resilience that are on the forefront of the international conversation. Researchers at LSU and Tulane and UNO and Nichols are doing some of the most innovative work across the world in carbon sequestration, in social sciences around planning and the human dimensions, around sediment transport and hydrology and geomorphology. I mean, this place, it's not can we create a blue economy? It's not can we create this opportunity? It's here. It's happening now. And so one of the hopes that I have for the Water Institute is that we can help coalesce and be part of that connective tissue to pull everybody together, so that when people externally and internally look at the state of Louisiana and look at the Gulf Coast, they're seeing that not only are there risks. Yes, there are risks. There are risks everywhere. But there is opportunity. And that opportunity, back to the C100 and economic development, it's not just pie in the sky research. It's not just academic thought, right? There are startups that are spinning out left and right. We've had the pleasure of working with a young startup called Arcoast that has been, bringing some of the most impressive remote sensing technology and drone and LiDAR work to try and help people manage shorelines, right? This isn't just about us or one university or one company or one nonprofit organization. It's about the whole ecosystem. And so, from an economic development standpoint, you go find a architectural and engineering firm, a Wagner and Ball, a Moffitt and Nickel, a Royal Engineering, an AECOM, and Arcata, somebody who works in the Gulf Coast and works on these issues in Louisiana. They're going to be better able to help communities around the world plan for, engineer, and build and design resilient systems, particularly around nature-based solutions. So this is a coastal and blue and resilient economy, Silicon Valley. And it's not just about thought and research and governments. There are awesome startups and a lot of energy that are popping out of that. And some really old companies, some really old companies that have been around for hundreds of years that may have shifted their mentality. I mean, you look down in Port Fourchon right now and see some of the workover boats that they're pivoting their workforce and they're pivoting their technology to go to Block Island, to go off Southwest Louisiana to build wind farms.
Can you tell us a bit more about how the Institute is balancing the interdependency between economic development and environmental conservation issues, while also protecting our rich cultural heritage and ensuring the long-term vibrancy of our working coast?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've learned in Louisiana, and when I say we, I mean this is decades and decades of understanding, is that there's no one size fits all, and we can't look at coastal Louisiana or the Gulf Coast or the communities that exist within it in the traditional winner loser black white NGO framework, right? That's just not how it works, right? We have very strange bedfellows in Louisiana, right? Some of our longest oil and gas operators are some of our most innovative, funders and thinkers around, climate and coastal research right now. So the balance between the green and the gray, the balance between the economic and the ecosystem is something that not only in Louisiana have we I think done a pretty good job of advancing, but it's core to who we are, right? Let's look back to the Cajun French language, right? If many of my family members hadn't had the oil and gas industry to go work into, or other industrial pursuits, or things that or the ability to go and live and work off the land, maybe they would have to move north and go work in a factory in Detroit, right? But we were able to stay here and live off this land, which, sometimes, doubles down on the sportsman's paradise, but also, looks into minerals and oil and gas opportunities and the industrial framework that we have now. And so there's some interesting, benefits from that. But, moving forward, you'll see whether it's Port Fourchon, and I'll pick on Port Fourchon for a second, right? So Port Fourchon, the Greater Lafourche Port Commission, is large oil field servicing port, just west of Grand Isle on the Caminada Headlands, and in Port Fourchon, they have these large boat slips and workboat facilities, and they knew that they had to dredge those facilities. Historically, not Port Fourchon, but historically, when you dredge something out, you go and you dump it off the continental shelf. It's the cheapest, easiest way to do it. Well, obviously, there's the beneficial use of dredge material program and various incentives that exist around to try and more beneficially use the dredge material. We also know that sediment in coastal Louisiana is the lifeblood, right? And so the Greater Lafourche Port Commission came to us, along with some of their tenants, Shell, Chevron, Danos, to try and help rethink the way that they use or could use this beneficial use dredge material. And so we conducted some of the most robust and cutting edge modeling to try and figure out what the best placement of this material was. What were their goals? What were the objectives of placing this material? Is it just to build a pretty wetland? Okay, that's one of them. But it's not just that. What we set out as the 4 criteria was, where can we place this dredge material that has the greatest benefit to protect the infrastructure, right? The highest community benefit, both in terms of protection and in terms of recreation. What has the greatest ecosystem benefit, right? What is going to build the most healthy ecosystem? And then also, what is going to have the highest carbon sequestration potential, right? So you can see not only in the state of Louisiana, but everything that we're doing across the Gulf Coast, where the conversation is starting to shift towards, the stacked or multiple benefits around opportunities. And this emanates from that dichotomy or perceived dichotomy around economy and ecosystems, or the blue and the green, the green and the gray, and it's really no one size fits all. And so that's what you're seeing in the Army Corps of Engineers is leading the way in thinking about the comprehensive benefits of coastal planning and nature-based solutions. So this is something that I'm really excited. It's not a one size fits all. It's not black or white. We can protect our infrastructure and have a community benefit as well when we're doing projects.
The Institute is involved in various aspects of the most complex, large-scale engineering efforts for long-term protection of our coast. But you're also spearheading the research and development of sticky issues and emerging tech, like the development of blue carbon credit authorization, protocols, monitoring, and monetization. Can you give us an overview of how these activities fit into your long-term mission and theory of change?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the blue carbon work is something that we and researchers across the state, both at Tulane and LSU in particular, have been looking into for decades. Right? Is what is the net carbon impact of coastal ecosystems? Right? We know just understanding the biologic process that oxygen goes out, carbon dioxide comes in. Well, does that have a carbon benefit? Yes. Right. And this conversation came up in the early 2000s when there was some speculation around the country going to a cap and trade market, and they said, "Hey, well, what's the carbon benefit of coastal Louisiana?" And from that time to now, you have this huge market that has stood up. It's on the order of $2 billion a year in the voluntary carbon market credits. And so, a voluntary carbon market, just for the listeners out there who aren't familiar with it, is the idea that activities conducted somewhere can offset somebody's more carbon-intensive activities in another place. And this is done through, conducting projects or preserving projects that are both additional and meet the standards of permanence. And when I say additional, that means that but for the carbon market, they would not have otherwise been constructed or protected to that effect. And secondly, the permanence is that they have to be present for a considerable period of time, generally 100 years, right? So the way that the carbon market mostly works right now is through either planting new trees or preserving trees that are already planted that are in theory going to be cut down. There are these independent third-party bodies like Verra and Gold Standard and American Carbon Registry that look at the projects and verify what the carbon sequestration benefit is. So this is an area of not only research in kind of fundamental research in what does Spartina grass do in terms of the greenhouse gas flux? What do emergent marshes do? How do submerged aquatic vegetation impact the carbon balance throughout the coast? And so this is a really interesting area of research, but also recognizing back to the fiscal cliff conversation that you had, the state of Louisiana last year did its first ever, and I think it's the only climate mitigation strategy in the Deep South. It's I would argue it's one of the more comprehensive ones across the country. And I encourage your listeners to go take a look at the climate action plan from 2022. And in that, one of the actions and proposed actions to try and reduce our overall emissions was to try and leverage the voluntary carbon markets, which exist internationally, to incentivize private investment into coastal Louisiana. Now, why? Again, back to that fiscal cliff conversation. At 2031, we're going to go from spending, proposed right now, I think this year we're spending around $1.6 billion of state and federal funds on, coastal master plan projects. And that number in 2031 is set to drop significantly. So whether it's through wind leasing or other opportunities, carbon markets are something that have come on the table for the state of Louisiana, and we were asked by the state of Louisiana, the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, and the Governor's Office of Coastal Activities to look into this and continue diving into the research, not just because we want to know, but is there a way to leverage some of that financial opportunity? And a lot of this conversation gets boiled down into markets, right? And that's one of the, if I dare say it, one of the sexier angles of it is like, oh, can we have a carbon coin that is traded so that I can come and purchase a coin and that's going to build an acre of wetlands? Maybe, right? I think it definitely is happening with mangrove habitats around the world. Pakistan just put online the Delta Blue Carbon Project, which is a massive blue carbon project, but it's centered around red mangroves, which is a little bit different in our habitat. So maybe there's a market out there, right? But one of the important things to recognize is that even if there's not a fungible, credit that exists at the end of this collective thought, and it's not just the Water Institute, it's the state, it's the universities, it's private sector entities around. Even if there's not a coin at the end of this, there are still a lot of reasons for us to better understand and quantify the carbon benefits of coastal Louisiana. Just to make the point a little bit more clearly is that oftentimes when we're trying to advocate for federal or international fundings for coastal Louisiana, we're showing pictures of the detrimental impacts of storms, and we're talking about look, this is the estuary that is so critical for the habitat for the red drum or for speckled trout or 110 species of neotropic migrant birds use coastal Louisiana as a southfall point. These are all, for me, these are very important points. But if you put them down into all the important points across the international economy and across the international philanthropic market, do they rise to that same level? But if you think of, and I don't have the exact notes in front of me, but something like 3 or 4% of the world's ecosystem are marshes, right? But it sequesters something like 30% of the world's carbon, right? So what we know is that coastal ecosystems, particularly marshes, have an outsized impact on drawing down carbon. And so even if there's not a market at the end of it, understanding and quantifying what that impact is yet another arrow in the quiver for people in the state of Louisiana to say we matter and this ecosystem matter. When most of this land was given away in the Swamplands Act, many decades ago, marshland was wasteland. Why would you drain it? Right? Drain it and let's make a society. Well, that may make sense if our only value that we're quantifying is fur and fur prices go down. That may make sense if our only metric is malaria, right? But if we're looking at the comprehensive suite of benefits and value of coastal ecosystems across the world, and the international community, sometimes more so, or oftentimes more so than the United States community is paying very close attention to the carbon impacts, then man, is that a story that I would want to tell on behalf of the state of Louisiana, the impacts of the carbon cycle and the impacts of the nature-based solutions and coastal ecosystems, whether it's cypress forests, grasslands, or marshes or submerged aquatic vegetation. So that's what we're looking at with a big group. We just started the Northern Gulf of Mexico Blue Carbon Working Group. I think you joined us at that meeting and brought in researchers from around around the Gulf South, Florida and South Carolina, Texas, and many in Louisiana to think about these issues, to try and think how we can figure out how we can advance the conversation. Sure, a market may be out there, but even if there's not a market, there is value in understanding the impacts.
What are some of your favorite indicative global or regional benchmarks or statistics that crystallize the Gulf Coast climate crisis for you and the opportunities that it may bring?
Yeah, I mean, there's my mind kind of spins in how to respond to that in Louisiana, right? In terms of the crisis, right? I mean, you can go through the economic, quote the numbers of the economic impact of shutting down the port of New Orleans for a day due to a hurricane. You can go to look at the numbers of structures that are outside of the realm of protection that may either need to be raised or communities need to be moved, like the Ile de Jean Charles. You can look at some of these things to really identify and define our risk. But I think focusing on the opportunity, and this is back to the carbon piece of this, is if you look at a terrestrial forest, which is the underpinning of the majority of the voluntary carbon market, is terrestrial forest, and you look at that, and you take 1 acre of terrestrial forest, the net carbon sequestration of an acre of coastal Louisiana marshes is 80x 1 acre of terrestrial forest. So 80x the carbon sequestration potential. Now, of course, that's net, right? So you have to factor in, land loss and hurricanes, and you have to factor in the dynamism of coastal ecosystems, and that's what we are trying to work through with a whole host of partners. But to me, if that doesn't show opportunity, that not only is there an entire economy, companies upon companies built around a voluntary carbon market across the world, mostly built off terrestrial forest. And you can look in coastal ecosystems like Louisiana or around the Gulf Coast or around the Gulf of Mexico, and you look at these coastal ecosystems, and they are sequestering 80x the carbon of a terrestrial forest. I mean, police call that a clue, right? There's something we should be looking into. And so I to me, that's one of the stats, not necessarily on the risk. I mean, there are tremendous risks that our communities are facing. The climate crisis is today, it's yesterday, and it's tomorrow. But again, the mantra for New Orleans, the mantra for the Gulf Coast is to find the opportunity through that risk, right? And we had the opportunity, just not too long ago, to go sit down with a whole host of folks. Or actually, we stood up in the event, but it was the Urban Water at 10 event that the Greater New Orleans Foundation, Greater New Orleans Incorporated, and Tulane Bywater Institute are pulling together to recognize how far we've come in the last 10 years around urban water, which is a long way. We've done some fantastic thought. We've done some fantastic modeling. There's incredible, small NGOs and small companies like, Batcher Engineering or the Front Yard Initiative of the Urban Conservancy that have been stood up around this paradigm shift, with all thanks to David Wagner and Mac Ball from their team, back 10 years ago. But it was a really interesting event, and there's going to be a series of events through the fall to say, okay, look, how far have we come? And it's a long way, but boy, do we have a long way to go. And to see this risk that faces us here in New Orleans with urban stormwater and urban resilience, and the balance between green and gray infrastructure, and particularly aging gray infrastructure, it is something that we can look at as let's run for the hills, right? But I was just in the hills a couple weeks ago, and there's a heat wave in the hills too, right? So we don't have many places to run. So we've got to settle in. We've got to face the music and find opportunity.
What are some key technologies or project types that you are watching come online that could be important or surprising new tools for coastal community resilience?
Yeah, the technology side of things is something that the Water Institute of today is really leaning into. Historically, we would be asked to do science. We would do, in my opinion, fantastic science and deliver it to a client and, produce a report and publish that paper in the scientific literature, and then move on to the next one, right? And one of the things that we're really thinking a lot about is, the Water Institute of Gulf, as I said, is a nonprofit. We got 85 people. We're in 17 states, just based upon where people live. Primarily our work is in the Gulf Coast. The challenge is much bigger than we will ever be able to solve, right? And so if our metric, and it is impact, is having an impact on the communities that we serve, then it can't just be a one and done project. It can't just be a one and done idea. We have to think about how to scale impact, how to scale solutions, not only for those communities that can pay for it and to find the newest hottest technology, but when we can think about how to boil innovative coastal and research and coastal thought into its component parts, we can then transmit that information to communities who maybe couldn't afford the work, right? And that's one of the big things that we're thinking about now. And so technology is a way to do that. Also, really boiling down your methodologies and creating, trainings and processes that can be disseminated into other communities is a way to really scale impact. Some of the technologies that I'm most excited about, we've been working on the river with the Port of New Orleans, the Port of South Louisiana, and the Louisiana Economic Development Administration, right? So, the economic LED and the Federal Economic Development Administration, where we got an economic development grant to go and try and help ports along the river become more resilient, part one, but also help them better understand what the bottom of the river looks like, right? So we've been doing this project called SmartPort. And what this is basically a crowdsourced application that we have uploaded onto 75 some odd tugboats and service boats up and down the Mississippi River from, really Myrtle Grove up to Baton Rouge right now. It can and will scale. But this application taps into the depth sounder of the boat, and it taps into the GPS and sends it up to the cloud. And every time that boat crosses the gold standard, which is an Army Corps of Engineers survey at the crossing, every time that boat crosses that gold standard survey, it calibrates the data. And so we're able to take a boat that, we don't know how much gas is in it. It's not calibrated. It's not connected to a datum on the bank. It is just telling you how much water is between you and what this sonar thinks is the bottom. But we're able to calibrate that to the Army Corps of Engineers gold standard surveys, and we have basically created a deputized army of survey boats on the Mississippi River through companies like Turn Services and Crescent and some fantastic visionary companies along the Mississippi River to allow us to put this technology on there. What we're able to do with that is create a near real-time bathymetric map of the bottom of the river, which is better than what we have right now. Right now, we have fantastic pilots that work up and down the Mississippi River. They are amazing at their job, and they know how to get ships in and out, right? But if you're a port manager, or if you're managing a boat slip, basically you just know when there's a shoal that comes in. You know when the sandbars come in. We know it's going to come after a high water event. We know it's going to lay down sediment. We don't know where. We don't know when. We don't know why. But what this technology has allowed us to do is say, not only create that real-time map, but then we take that real-time data and we plug it into artificial intelligence and machine learning predictive models. And we're able to anticipate 7, 14, 20 days into the future, what is the bottom of the river going to look like in this space? So this is, the goal of this, it is explicitly an Economic Development Administration grant, right? The idea is how can we make the ports along the Mississippi River and the companies that operate along the Mississippi River more economically competitive? It's scientifically interesting to us, right? We love the idea of understanding how the water and the sediment flows across the bottom of the river. But this is one of the many technologies that we're working with right now that I think is fascinating and also completely scalable, right? You think about, we're not the only river in the world. We're not the only place where sedimentation and shoaling happens. What we can learn from really some visionary leadership from the Port of New Orleans and the Port of South Louisiana to see this initial work, and then the LED in Louisiana believing in this project and funding it. This is something that can go all the way up the Mississippi River and help ports and operators along the Mississippi River create a more efficient, a safer water economy along the Mississippi River. We know that transporting, goods and grains on the Mississippi River is one of the most safest and efficient and environmentally friendly ways to get grains to market. Well, if this can help, then that's, to me, that's technology that we should be believing in and investing in.
Is there anything that I missed that you'd like to discuss?
I think Greg, I'll chime on this just for the listeners. This is something, my role here at the Water Institute, obviously I'm stepping in as the acting president and CEO of the Water Institute of the Gulf. The reason I'm doing that is because one of my dear friends and our, visionary leader, Justin Aaronworth, recently passed away. And Justin, again, was a fantastic friend and an amazing leader of the Water Institute, amazing leader of the Restore Council, a beloved person in this community. And I mentioned that, one, just to honor him and to make clear that this is a shared journey, right? When you have either, I don't know if it's the honor, the stupidity, or the opportunity to work on problems that you will never see solved. There's some shared camaraderie there, right? I'm not trying to, build a spreadsheet that I know is going to work, right? What we and our team and all of our partners in the private sector, in the public sector, in the university sector, and in the startup community, what we are all doing is trying to look at the horizon and try and solve problems that are coming down the pipe that are existential, right? And we know that we're not going to fix them, but we know that we have the opportunity to move the ball just a little bit. And so, Justin was somebody who stood on the shoulders of giants that came before him, like Woody Gagliano and Lynn Barr. And Scott Hagen, and then now we have this opportunity and this challenge to jump on Justin's shoulders, and the many other shoulders that are out there of giants to try and carry this work before we pass it off to the next generation.
So what is next for you, Beaux? What are you most excited about in your personal or professional journey?
Oh, I mean, next for me is to try and juggle two kids and life in New Orleans, make it through the summer, see if we can get back to some good weather. But in the Water Institute, we have this challenge and this opportunity in front of us, like so many folks, to really hone in on who we are. What we want to focus on. We have some amazing clients and partners and opportunities to look at carbon, to look at nature-based solutions, to look at urban resilience. And so we're just going to keep the foot on the accelerator. I won't say keep the foot on the gas, but we're going to keep the foot on the accelerator and try and move forward. I mean, there are a lot of risk on our horizon. There are a lot of challenges for this community and for all of the communities along the Gulf Coast, some of them that may not be as charismatic as New Orleans risk. But what we know is that if we plot forward, we put science, engineering, innovative thought at the forefront of decisions, that we will make better decisions. We will create more resilient and equitable communities. We will create thriving economies. And we will do that by leveraging healthy ecosystems. So we're going to keep the foot down. We're going to keep moving. For me, it's about finding balance between all that. Raise good kids. Grab the flag of the mission, but recognize that it's a long race.
Well, Beaux, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us on the Blue Economy Primer. I feel like we basically just got a master's course in strategies for resilient coastal communities. It's clear that this is a dynamic period in the important work of the Water Institute. We'll look forward to staying in touch and following your evolving role in ensuring that Louisiana is not only properly prepared, but also leading the way in the implementation of coastal resilience solution sets worldwide.
Thanks so much, Greg, and thanks to you and all your listeners for everything that y'all are doing.
Thank you for joining us on the Blue Economy Primer. If you enjoyed today's podcast, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Please help us spread the word, and be sure to visit our website at www.deepblue.academy, where you can find all of our available episodes, access important links and supporting information for each episode, send us your comments and/or suggestions for potential guests and topics, get more information about our community engagement initiatives, and join our mailing list, as well as make a much-appreciated tax-deductible donation to support our nonprofit education and research mission. Thanks again to the Dan Lucas Memorial Foundation and the Pontchartrain Conservancy for their critical financial and institutional support. Until next time, when we meet again on the ever-expanding horizon of the Blue Economy.